The phone screen was cracked in 3 places, creating a spider web of fractures that distorted everything I tried to edit. Each crack told a story of late nights, dropped dreams, and the desperate hope that somehow, this broken device would be my gateway to something bigger. But it was all I had. At 22, I was living paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment that was barely bigger than a closet. The walls were thin enough that I could hear every argument, every celebration, every moment of life happening around me while I sat alone with my dreams. I worked at a coffee shop by day, memorizing the orders of customers who talked casually about their creative projects, their connections, their opportunities. By night, I edited videos on that broken phone, squinting at the fractured screen until my eyes burned and my head pounded. My tiny apartment was cluttered with borrowed equipment that I treated like precious artifacts. A friend's old tripod with a wobbly leg. A microphone I had found at a garage sale that picked up static if you breathed on it wrong. Scripts scrawled on napkins, coffee stained and wrinkled from being stuffed in my purse. Dreams that felt too big for my reality. Too ambitious for someone who could not even afford to fix her phone screen. I had grown up in a small town where creative careers were seen as pipe dreams. My parents, though loving, had always pushed me toward practical choices. When I announced I wanted to be a filmmaker, my father had sighed and asked when I was going to get serious about my future. My mother had suggested I consider teaching instead, something stable and respectable. But I could not shake the feeling that I had stories to tell. Stories about women who did not fit the mold. Stories about struggles that were not glamorous enough for mainstream media. Stories about the quiet heroism of everyday survival. That was when Ryan walked into my life. He was everything I thought I wanted. Older, confident, with expensive camera equipment and connections in the film industry. When he ordered his coffee, he talked on the phone about projects and collaborators and creative vision. When he told me he was a filmmaker, my heart raced. When he said he loved my ambition, my creativity, my spark, I felt like I had finally found someone who understood me. But understanding and supporting are 2 very different things. The first few months were intoxicating. Ryan would watch my rough cuts and nod approvingly. He would talk about our future projects, our shared vision. He had this way of making me feel like I was part of something bigger, something important. I felt like I had found my creative soulmate, someone who would help me build the career I had always dreamed of. He would take me to industry events where I met other filmmakers, producers, and artists. I was so grateful to be included in these circles, so excited to finally be around people who spoke my language. Ryan would introduce me as his talented girlfriend, and I would beam with pride. I thought I was being accepted into the community I had always longed to join. But as soon as we moved in together, everything changed. It started subtly. Little comments here and there. Suggestions that felt more like corrections. Compliments that came with conditions attached. "You are talented, but you are just not polished," he would say, watching me edit a wedding video on my laptop. "You need to think more commercially. This artsy stuff is fine as a hobby, but if you want to make it professionally, you need to be more strategic." I started to doubt myself. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was too idealistic, too naive about the industry. Maybe I needed his guidance to succeed. After all, he had been doing this longer than I had. He had connections I did not have. He had experience I lacked. The criticisms became more frequent, more cutting. "You will never get clients if you keep doing this artsy feminist stuff," he told me one evening, looking over my shoulder as I worked on a short documentary about local women entrepreneurs. "People want stories they can relate to, not political statements." I deleted the project that night. 3 weeks of work, gone. Interviews with women who had shared their most vulnerable stories with me, erased. But Ryan was right, I told myself. I needed to be more commercial, more appealing to a broader audience. "You need me," he would say when I expressed doubts about changing my style. "I am the real storyteller here. I have the experience, the connections, the vision. You have passion, which is great, but passion without direction is just noise." I started letting him direct my ideas. When I came up with a concept for a film about a young woman starting her own business, he suggested we change it to be about a young man instead. "More relatable," he said. When I wrote a script about female friendship, He rewrote it to focus on a romantic relationship. People want love stories, he explained. When I wanted to explore themes of independence and self-discovery, he steered me toward more traditional narratives. Trust me, he would say. I know what works. And I did trust him. I trusted him when he took credit for my work in meetings with potential collaborators. I trusted him when he told me to focus on supporting him, because that was what real love looked like. I trusted him when he said my ideas were good, but needed his polish to be great. I became smaller and smaller, editing myself before I even shared my thoughts. I stopped writing the stories that excited me and started crafting the ones he approved of. I stopped seeing myself as a filmmaker and started seeing myself as his assistant. The worst part was how gradual it all was. How reasonable each individual request seemed. How easy it was to rationalize giving up pieces of myself one by one. I told myself I was learning, growing, becoming more professional. I told myself that compromise was part of any relationship. But deep down, I could feel something dying inside me. The fire that had driven me to stay up all night editing, to spend my last $20 on film equipment, to believe that my voice mattered, was slowly being extinguished. I stopped calling my friends as much. I stopped going to the small film screenings I used to love. I stopped writing in my journal, stopped sketching out ideas, stopped dreaming about the projects I wanted to create. I became a shadow of myself, and I did not even realize it was happening. But there was one project I could not let go of. Late at night, after Ryan had gone to sleep, I would sneak into our makeshift editing room and work on something that was entirely mine. It was a short film about a young woman who discovers her voice through art, despite the people around her trying to silence her. I wrote it in stolen moments, shot it with borrowed equipment and volunteer actors who believed in the story as much as I did. It was raw, unpolished, and completely authentic. It was everything Ryan said would never work commercially. It was everything I had been told to avoid. But it was mine. The story came from a place deep inside me that I had almost forgotten existed. It was about a girl who painted murals on abandoned buildings, whose art was constantly being covered up by the city, whose vision was dismissed by everyone around her. But she kept painting anyway, because she knew her voice mattered, even if no one else believed it. I shot it guerrilla style, with no permits, no budget, no safety net. The actors were friends who believed in the story. The locations were places I had scouted during my lunch breaks. The equipment was borrowed, begged, and improvised. For weeks, I worked on it in secret. I edited it on my cracked phone screen, color-corrected it during my lunch breaks, and mixed the audio with headphones that only worked if I held the wire just right. It was not perfect, but it was honest. It was the story I needed to tell. I poured everything into those 15 minutes. All of my fears, my hopes, my frustrations, my dreams. Every late night I had spent questioning my talent. Every moment I had felt silenced or dismissed. Every spark of creativity that had been dimmed by someone else's expectations. When I finally finished it, my hands were shaking. I had created something that was entirely mine, something that came from the deepest part of my soul. It was the most personal thing I had ever created. I showed it to Ryan one evening, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. He watched it in silence. I studied his face, looking for any sign of approval, any recognition of what I had accomplished. I was desperate for his validation, for some sign that maybe, just maybe, I had created something worthwhile. When the credits rolled, he sat back in his chair and sighed. "It is cute," he said, not looking at me. "But no one is going to take you seriously without me." Those words hit me like a physical blow. After everything I had sacrificed, every compromise I had made, every piece of myself I had given up to support his vision, this was what he thought of my work when it was truly mine. Cute. Like a child's drawing stuck to a refrigerator. Like something to be patted on the head and dismissed. That was the last thing he ever said to me as my boyfriend. Because that night, I packed my hard drive, my notebooks, and what was left of my self-respect. I packed my cracked phone and my broken dreams. I packed my scripts and my courage and my determination to prove him wrong. And I left. Walking out of that apartment felt like stepping out of a cage I had not even realized I was in. The air felt different. The world looked brighter. For the first time in months, I could breathe without asking permission. But leaving was just the beginning. I had to find a new place to live, and with my coffee shop salary, my options were limited. I ended up in an even smaller studio apartment, but it was mine. Every corner of it was mine. I could put my scripts wherever I wanted. I could edit at any hour without apologizing for the noise. I could dream as big as I wanted without someone telling me to be more realistic. For the next 18 months, I worked in silence. I edited weddings on weekends to pay rent, carrying my equipment on public transportation, learning to set up and break down quickly and efficiently. I wrote scripts on lunch breaks at the coffee shop, stealing moments between customers to jot down dialogue and character descriptions. I learned color grading at 2 in the morning, watching YouTube tutorials until my eyes burned. The loneliness was crushing sometimes. I would go days without talking to anyone about my work, my dreams, my struggles. I missed having someone to share my excitement with when I figured out a difficult edit, or came up with a perfect line of dialogue. But I also realized how much freedom I had gained. There was no glamour in it. No shortcuts. No connections to open doors for me. Just me, my broken phone, and an unshakable belief that I had something to say. I submitted my short film to festivals. Small ones at first. Local competitions and online showcases. I expected rejection. I had been told for so long that my work was not good enough, not commercial enough, not polished enough. But then something incredible happened. My film got accepted. Not to one festival, but to several. Then more. The first acceptance email made me cry. The second one made me realize it was not a fluke. By the fifth acceptance, I was starting to believe that maybe I had been right about my vision all along. Suddenly, I was getting emails from programmers who wanted to know about my next project. Producers were asking about my feature-length scripts. People were taking me seriously. Without him, the validation felt surreal. After so many months of doubt, of being told that my vision was wrong, that my stories did not matter, that I needed someone else to make me legitimate, I was finally being recognized for the work that was most authentically mine. I started getting invited to panels about independent filmmaking. I was asked to speak at film schools about following your vision. Young filmmakers would approach me after screenings, thanking me for making something that spoke to their experience. One girl, probably about the same age I had been when I met Ryan, told me that my film had inspired her to submit her own work to festivals. She said she had been afraid her stories were too personal, too unconventional, but seeing my film had given her courage. That moment crystallized everything for me. This was why I made films. Not for the approval of industry gatekeepers or manipulative partners, but to connect with people who needed to hear these stories. I wrote my first feature-length script during this time. It was about a young woman whose boyfriend keeps her small, convincing her that she needs him to succeed, until she finally breaks free and builds her own creative empire from the ashes of her old life. It was my story, but it was also the story of every woman who has ever been told she was not enough on her own. The writing process was cathartic and painful. I had to relive every moment of manipulation, every instance of self-doubt, every time I had made myself smaller to fit someone else's vision. But I also got to write the ending I had lived, the triumph of breaking free and discovering my own worth. A small studio backed the project. The meeting where they said yes was one of the most surreal moments of my life. They believed in the story, believed in my vision, believed in me in a way that I was still learning to believe in myself. "We have been looking for a story like this," the producer told me. "Something authentic. Something that speaks to the experience of young women trying to find their voice. You understand this story in a way that no one else could." The production was everything I had dreamed of. Working with actors who understood the material, collaborating with a crew who shared my passion for the story, having creative control over every aspect of the film. It was hard work, but it was the kind of hard work that feeds your soul instead of depleting it. The lead actress, Sarah, was a young woman who had her own experiences with manipulative relationships. She brought such depth and authenticity to the role that sometimes I would get chills watching her perform. She understood the character's journey from the inside out. "This script saved my life," she told me one day between takes. "I was in a relationship just like this. And reading your words helped me realize what was happening to me. I left him 2 weeks after I got cast in this film. When we wrapped principal photography, I cried. Not from exhaustion or stress, but from pure joy. I had created something that was entirely mine, something that told the story I needed to tell in the way I wanted to tell it. Post-production was a labor of love. Every edit, every color correction, every sound design choice was deliberate and meaningful. I was no longer editing on a cracked phone screen. I had proper equipment, professional software, and most importantly, complete creative freedom. I worked with a brilliant editor who understood my vision and helped me refine it without compromising its authenticity. We spent weeks fine-tuning every moment, every emotion, every beat of the story. The film was becoming something even more powerful than I had imagined. As the premiere date approached, I felt a mixture of excitement and terror. This film was so personal, so vulnerable, so connected to my own experience of breaking free from someone who had tried to keep me small. I was putting my heart on display for the world to see. The marketing campaign was grassroots and authentic. We focused on connecting with women who had similar experiences, who had been told they were not enough, who had fought to find their voice. The response was overwhelming. Women were sharing their own stories, thanking me for making something that represented their experience. Opening night arrived faster than I expected. The theater was packed with industry professionals, film critics, and people who had supported my journey. I saw faces I recognized from the coffee shop, from film school, from the small screenings I used to attend. But I also saw strangers who had come because they connected with the story. I sat in the front row, palms sweating, watching my story play out on the big screen. Seeing it in a theater, with an audience, made it feel surreal. This was really happening. I had really made this film. The film was everything I had hoped it would be. Raw, honest, empowering. The audience was engaged, laughing at the right moments, silent during the emotional scenes. I could feel their energy, their connection to the story. During the most intense scenes, where the protagonist is being manipulated and gaslit, I could hear people in the audience reacting. Some were crying. Others were whispering to their friends. I could feel that they understood, that they had been there too. As the climax approached, where the protagonist finally stands up to her manipulative boyfriend and walks out to build her own life, I heard people in the audience react. Some gasped. Others cheered. A few were crying openly. The protagonist's final speech, where she tells her ex-boyfriend that she does not need his permission to succeed, that she never did, brought the house down. People were clapping, shouting, crying. I had never experienced anything like it. When the final scene played, showing the protagonist years later, successful and fulfilled, living the life she had always dreamed of on her own terms, the entire theater erupted in applause. The film ended. The room stood. The ovation went on for what felt like hours. I walked on stage, my legs shaking, my heart pounding. I looked out at the audience and saw faces streaming with tears, people clapping so hard their hands must have hurt. I saw the coffee shop customers who had watched me struggle, the film school classmates who had supported me, the strangers who had connected with my story. I thanked the crew, my parents who had finally come to understand my passion, my therapist who had helped me heal from the emotional abuse. I thanked the actors who had brought my characters to life and the studio that had believed in my vision. And then, as the credits rolled on the screen behind me, I saw it. In the special thanks section, exactly where I had placed it, was a line that made the entire theater gasp and then burst into laughter and applause. Special thanks, Ryan, for leaving. The irony was not lost on anyone. The man who had told me I would never make it without him had become the catalyst for my greatest success. His cruelty had become my motivation. His doubt had become my determination. Standing on that stage, looking out at an audience that was celebrating my work, my vision, my voice, I realized something profound. He had been right about one thing. I did need someone to push me. I just had not known it would be out the door. The reviews were incredible. Critics praised the authenticity of the story, the strength of the performances, and the bold vision of the direction. They called it a triumph of independent filmmaking, a powerful statement about finding your voice in a world that tries to silence you. The New York Times called it a masterclass in authentic storytelling. Variety praised its unflinching honesty and emotional depth. The Hollywood Reporter wrote that it was essential viewing for anyone who has ever been told they were not enough. But the reviews that mattered most to me were the ones from ordinary women who saw themselves in the story. They wrote to me about their own experiences with manipulation, their own struggles to find their voice, their own journeys to independence. One woman wrote, "I watched your film with my daughter, and afterward she told me about her relationship. We talked for hours about what love should and should not look like. You may have saved her from years of pain." Another wrote, "I left my emotionally abusive marriage after watching your film. I realized that what I was experiencing was not love, it was control. Thank you for showing me that I could survive on my own." Awards followed. Film festival selections, distribution deals, offers for my next project. But the sweetest victory was not the accolades or the success. It was the knowledge that I had proved everyone wrong who had ever told me I was not enough on my own. I had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to me and turned it into the fuel for my greatest achievement. Every time someone watches my film, they see the story of a woman who refused to be kept small. They see the power of walking away from people who do not value your worth. They see that sometimes the best revenge is not getting angry, but getting successful. And every time those credits roll, every time someone sees that special thanks, they are reminded that sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up being the ones who help us find our strength. I never saw Ryan again after that night I left. I heard through mutual friends that he saw the film, saw the credits, saw my success. I heard that he was not happy about being called out so publicly. But I also heard that he had not made any films of his own since I left. Maybe he realized that the talent he had been trying to control and diminish had been the real creative force in our relationship. Maybe he understood that his role had been to tear down, not to build up. Maybe he finally saw that real love supports and celebrates. It does not diminish and control. Or maybe he was just angry that I had gotten the last word. Either way, it did not matter to me anymore. I had moved on. I had grown. I had become the filmmaker I was always meant to be. The success of my first feature opened doors I had never imagined. Studios were courting me for projects. Actors wanted to work with me. Other filmmakers sought my advice and collaboration. But more importantly, I had found my voice. I knew who I was as an artist, what stories I wanted to tell, what vision I wanted to share with the world. I had learned to trust my instincts, to value my own opinion, to believe in my own worth. I started a production company focused on telling stories about women finding their power. I created mentorship programs for young filmmakers who had been told their visions were too unconventional. I spoke at conferences about the importance of authentic storytelling and the dangers of letting others define your worth. The little girl who used to edit videos on a cracked phone screen was now a successful director with her own production company. The young woman who had been told she was not polished enough was now being courted by major studios. The artist who had been told her vision was too niche was now creating content that resonated with audiences around the world. I had proved that I did not need anyone to validate my worth. I had proved that I could make it on my own. I had proved that my voice mattered. And in the end, that was worth more than any relationship, any approval, any false sense of security that came from depending on someone else. I had learned that the only person who could truly keep me small was myself. And I had decided never to do that again. The phone screen is still cracked, but now I keep it as a reminder. A reminder of where I came from, what I survived, and how far I have come. It sits on my desk in my production office, next to awards and accolades, a testament to the journey from broken dreams to breakthrough success. My second film was even more successful than the first. It premiered at Cannes, something I had only dreamed of during those late nights editing on my cracked screen. The story was about a group of women who start their own film production company after being dismissed by the male-dominated industry. It was inspired by my own journey, but it was also the story of every woman who had ever been told she did not belong in a creative field. The cast was incredible. A-list actresses who had been waiting for roles that showed their range, their depth, their power. They understood the material on a visceral level because they had lived it. We had conversations on set about their own experiences with being underestimated, dismissed, told they were too old, too difficult, too ambitious. The lead actress, Maria, was a veteran performer who had been pigeonholed into romantic comedies for decades. "I have been waiting my entire career for a role like this," she told me during rehearsals. "A character who is complex, flawed, real. Not just someone's girlfriend or wife, but a fully realized human being with her own dreams and struggles." The film was a box office success, but more importantly, it started conversations. Women in the industry began sharing their own stories of discrimination, of being told they were not cut out for leadership roles, of having their ideas stolen or dismissed. The Me Too movement was gaining momentum, and my film became part of that larger conversation about power, respect, and equality. I was invited to speak at the United Nations about women in media. I appeared on talk shows, at conferences, at film schools. But the moments that mattered most were the quiet ones. The young filmmaker who approached me after a screening to tell me she had decided to submit her script to festivals. The woman who left her controlling manager after seeing my film. The girl who decided to pursue film school despite her family's objections. Ryan tried to contact me after my second film's success. He sent an email through my production company, claiming he wanted to reconnect and discuss opportunities for collaboration. The audacity was breathtaking. The same man who had told me I would never make it without him was now trying to ride my coattails to success. I had my assistant send a polite but firm response. "Ms. Johnson appreciates your interest but is not pursuing new collaborations at this time." I heard later that he had been telling people he had discovered me, that he had been instrumental in my early development as a filmmaker. The revisionist history was almost amusing. The man who had tried to dim my light was now claiming credit for my brightness. But I did not let his attempts to rewrite our story affect me. I had learned too much about my own worth to be diminished by someone else's desperation for relevance. My third film was my most personal yet. It was about a young woman who loses her voice, literally and figuratively, after trauma, and slowly learns to speak again through art. It was inspired by my own journey of finding my voice after being silenced, but it was also about the universal experience of healing from hurt. The production was the most challenging yet. We were dealing with sensitive subject matter, and I wanted to handle it with care and authenticity. I worked with trauma counselors, therapists, and survivors to ensure the story was told responsibly. The film premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival. The audience was silent throughout most of the screening, but when the protagonist finally finds her voice again, speaking her truth for the first time in years, the theater erupted in applause. People were crying, hugging, sharing their own stories of finding strength after trauma. That film won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. Standing on that stage, holding the golden statue, I thought about the 22-year-old girl editing videos on a cracked phone screen. I thought about the nights I had cried myself to sleep, wondering if I would ever be good enough. I thought about the moment I had decided to leave everything behind and bet on myself. In my acceptance speech, I thanked my team, my family, my therapist, and all the women who had shared their stories with me. And then I said something that made headlines the next day. To everyone who has ever been told they are not enough, that their voice does not matter, that they need someone else to validate their worth. You are enough. Your voice matters. Your story deserves to be told. And sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is someone showing you exactly who they are, so you can choose to be someone different. The camera caught Ryan in the audience. He had somehow gotten a ticket to the ceremony, probably hoping to be seen associating with my success. His face when I gave that speech was priceless. He knew exactly what I was talking about, and so did everyone else who knew our story. After the ceremony, reporters asked me about my journey, about the obstacles I had overcome. I talked about the importance of authentic storytelling, about the power of finding your voice, about the necessity of surrounding yourself with people who build you up instead of tearing you down. But I did not mention Ryan by name. I did not give him the satisfaction of being part of my success story, even as a villain. He had been erased from my narrative, relegated to a cautionary tale I sometimes shared with young filmmakers about the importance of trusting their instincts. The years that followed were filled with more successes. I directed a limited series for a streaming platform about women throughout history who had been written out of the record books. I produced documentaries about female artists, entrepreneurs, and activists. I started a foundation that provided grants to emerging female filmmakers. But the project I was most proud of was a mentorship program I created for young women in the industry. We paired established filmmakers with newcomers, providing not just professional guidance, but emotional support. I remembered how isolated I had felt during my early years, how desperate I had been for someone to believe in my vision. One of my ments, a brilliant young director named Zoe, reminded me so much of myself at that age. She had the same hunger, the same passion, the same willingness to work with limited resources to tell the stories that mattered to her. She also had the same vulnerability to manipulation from people who claimed to want to help her. I met this producer, she told me during one of our sessions. He says he loves my work, but he thinks I need to change the ending of my script. He says the female protagonist is too strong, too independent. He thinks audiences will not connect with her. I felt a chill of recognition. What do you think? I asked her. I think he is wrong, she said, but her voice was uncertain. But he has connections, experience. Maybe he knows something I do not. Trust your instincts, I told her. Your voice is the only one that matters when it comes to your art. Anyone who tries to diminish that voice is not someone you want to work with. 6 months later, Zoe's film premiered at Sundance. It was exactly as she had envisioned it, with the strong, independent protagonist intact. The film won the Audience Award and was picked up for distribution. The producer who had tried to change her vision was nowhere to be found. You saved my career, she told me at the after-party. If I had listened to him, I would have made a film I was not proud of. Instead, I made the film I needed to make. That conversation reminded me why I had started the mentorship program. It was not just about teaching technical skills or industry knowledge. It was about helping young women trust themselves, value their own voices, and recognize when someone was trying to diminish their power. I thought about all the women who had not had that guidance, who had compromised their visions, who had let others define their worth. I thought about the stories that had been lost, the voices that had been silenced, the dreams that had been deferred. But I also thought about the women who had found their strength, who had refused to be kept small, who had turned their pain into power. They were the ones who inspired me to keep telling stories, to keep fighting for authentic representation, to keep believing in the transformative power of art. 10 years after my first film premiered, I was asked to speak at my old film school. The auditorium was packed with young filmmakers, their faces bright with the same hope and determination I had once felt. They asked me about my journey, about the obstacles I had overcome, about the advice I would give to emerging artists. The most important thing I can tell you, I said, is to trust your voice. There will be people who try to convince you that you need them, that your vision is wrong, that you are not ready. But you are the only one who can tell your story. You are the only one who can decide what you are capable of. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. What if you are not sure if your voice is worth listening to? I smiled, remembering asking myself that same question so many times. Your voice is worth listening to because it is yours. It is unique, it is authentic, it is the only one like it in the world. The question is not whether it is worth listening to. The question is whether you are brave enough to use it. After the event, several students approached me with their own stories. Some had been told they were too young, too inexperienced, too idealistic. Others had been discouraged by family members, professors, or industry professionals. All of them were struggling with the same question I had once faced. Was their dream worth pursuing? I want to make films about environmental justice, one student told me. But everyone says it is too political, too niche. They say I should make more commercial content first. What do you think? I asked her, the same question I had asked Zoe. I think the planet is dying and we need to tell stories that matter, she said with conviction. Then tell those stories, I told her. The world needs your voice, your perspective, your passion. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise. I left the film school that day feeling energized and hopeful. The next generation of filmmakers was talented, passionate, and determined. They had the same fire I had once felt, the same belief that stories could change the world. But I also worried about them. I knew they would face the same challenges I had faced, the same attempts to diminish their voices, the same pressure to compromise their visions. I hoped they would be stronger than I had been, more confident in their own worth. That night, I called my therapist, the same woman who had helped me heal from the emotional abuse I had suffered in my relationship with Ryan. We had continued working together over the years, not because I was still broken, but because I believed in the importance of mental health and self-reflection. I keep thinking about that girl I used to be, I told her. The one who let someone else define her worth. I wonder what would have happened if I had not found the strength to leave. But you did find that strength, she reminded me. And look what you have accomplished. Look how many lives you have touched. She was right. I had not just survived that relationship. I had thrived in spite of it. I had built a career, a company, a legacy that was entirely my own. I had helped other women find their voices, trust their instincts, and pursue their dreams. But more importantly, I had learned to love myself. I had learned to value my own opinion, to trust my own judgment, to believe in my own worth. I had learned that I did not need anyone else to validate my existence, my dreams, or my voice. The journey had not been easy. There had been moments of doubt, setbacks, and failures. There had been times when I wondered if I was strong enough, talented enough, worthy enough to succeed. But I had persevered, and that perseverance had been rewarded. As I sat in my office that night, surrounded by awards and accolades, I picked up my old phone with the cracked screen. I had kept it all these years as a reminder of where I had come from, but also as a symbol of resilience. Like me, it had been broken but still functional. Like me, it had been dismissed but still capable of creating something beautiful. I thought about Ryan, and for the first time in years, I felt something other than anger or resentment. I felt gratitude. Not for the pain he had caused me, but for the strength I had discovered because of it. He had shown me what I did not want in a partner, in a collaborator, in a life. He had pushed me to find my own voice by trying to silence it. In a strange way, he had been right. I had needed someone to push me. I had just not known it would be out the door and into the life I was meant to live. I opened my laptop and began typing a new script. It was about a young woman who discovers that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that ever happens to you. It was about the power of choosing yourself, of betting on your own worth, of refusing to be kept small. It was another story that needed to be told, another voice that needed to be heard, another reminder that we are all capable of more than we know. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is leave. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. Sometimes the people who try to break you end up being the ones who help you discover just how strong you really are. And sometimes the sweetest victory is not just proving them wrong, but thanking them for giving you the chance to prove yourself right. As I wrote through the night, I realized that my story was not just about revenge or vindication. It was about transformation, about the alchemy of turning pain into power, trauma into triumph, betrayal into breakthrough. I had learned that success was not about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving yourself right. It was about honoring your own voice, following your own path, and creating the life you were meant to live. The cracked phone screen reflected the light from my laptop, creating a rainbow of colors across my desk. It was beautiful in its brokenness, powerful in its persistence, triumphant in its ability to still create something meaningful despite being damaged. Just like me, just like all of us who have ever been told we were not enough, who have ever been broken by someone else's cruelty, who have ever had to find the strength to rebuild ourselves from the ashes of what we once were. We are not defined by what breaks us. We are defined by what we do with the pieces. And sometimes from those pieces, we build something even more beautiful than what we had before. If this story inspired you to chase your dreams despite the doubters, please subscribe to our channel for more stories of triumph over adversity. Your support means everything to creators who are fighting to share their authentic voices with the world.